Thank you for listening. This course was created to help you succeed in your educational journey. Learn more at baremetalcyber.com, where additional podcasts, books, newsletters, and cool merchandise await. Let's get started. When we speak of the legal horizon, we mean the shifting landscape of statutes, regulations, and enforcement practices that your AI program must anticipate, not merely react to. Unlike static rulebooks, this horizon moves as lawmakers learn from incidents, courts interpret ambiguous language, and regulators publish guidance. You will see global elements: privacy, safety, transparency paired with sectoral nuances for healthcare, finance, education, and government. Treat the horizon as context setting for security. It explains why you collect certain evidence, label specific outputs, or gate risky capabilities. Because rules evolve unevenly across jurisdictions, your policies must be adaptable, with clear triggers for review when a law changes or a new regulator asserts authority. The practical goal is foresight. Build systems and governance that can flex without rebuilding foundations each quarter, keeping both innovation and compliance within the same disciplined frame. Privacy regulation remains the anchor for most AI obligations because data fuels models. Core themes repeat across regimes. Collect only what you need for stated purposes. Secure it proportionately to risk. Honor user rights to access, deletion, and objection, and report breaches promptly. Comprehensive privacy laws in several regions add special protections for sensitive data and restrict automated decision-making that has significant effects on individuals. Sectoral rules, such as those governing health records or financial information, layer tighter controls on top. Think stricter consent, audit trails, and retention limits. For AI teams, this translates into data mapping rigor, provenance for training corpora, minimization in feature stores, and privacy impact assessments before releases. If your pipelines cannot answer who contributed which data, under what basis, and how it can be removed, you will struggle to satisfy both auditors and user expectations. AI-specific legislation is emerging to address risks beyond raw privacy. Many frameworks classify applications by risk: minimal, limited, high, and prohibited, and tie obligations to those categories. High-risk systems often require documented risk management, transparency to users, quality datasets, human oversight, and post-market monitoring. Some jurisdictions impose conformity assessments before deployment and demand incident reporting when safety or fundamental rights are threatened. In parallel, subnational rules and agency guidance introduce domain-focused requirements, while several Asian models prioritize innovation sandboxes paired with codes of practice. International bodies publish principles that, while not binding, influence local rulemaking and procurement language. Your task is to read across these sources and converge on a single internal baseline that meets or exceeds the strictest applicable standard. That way, you avoid fragmenting controls by geography and keep engineering effort aligned to stable, organization-wide expectations. Content and transparency laws increasingly touch AI outputs, not just inputs. Several regimes contemplate or require clear labeling when content is synthetic, especially in political or commercial contexts where deception would mislead voters or consumers. Provenance expectations are rising. Publishers may be asked to preserve edit histories or attach verifiable manifests so audiences and platforms can check origin. Traditional consumer protection enforcers are also active, treating misleading claims generated by models as advertising or fraud problems, regardless of the medium. Election-related measures add time-bound obligations around blackout periods, disclaimers, and takedown speed for impersonations. For product teams, the operational response is straightforward. Label when generation occurs, sign official media with provenance signals, and prepare playbooks for rapid correction when an output could confuse stakeholders. These habits reduce legal exposure and build credibility with users who are learning to look for trustworthy markers. Intellectual property law is the second major pillar shaping AI practice. Copyright questions arise at both ingestion and output, What rights and licenses cover training data, and when do generated artifacts infringe or create protectable works? Jurisdictions diverge on whether machine-authored outputs can be copyrighted and how transformative use applies at training scale. Licensing of models and datasets adds contractual limits, redistribution, reverse engineering, benchmarks that bind enterprise users beyond statutory baselines. Derivative works concerns surface when outputs closely track a living artist's style or reproduce memorized text or imagery. Patent issues emerge as teams seek protection from model architectures, training tricks, or application behavior while avoiding claims that overreach. Navigating this terrain requires inventory-level transparency, rights management for corpora, filters to reduce regurgitation, and council-approved guidelines for style prompts and commercial claims. The aim is respectful, defensible creation that withstands scrutiny. Liability in AI use determines who pays when harm occurs. Legal theories range from negligence and misrepresentation to product liability analogies for systems that fail in foreseeable ways. Contracts allocate risk through warranties, indemnities, and limitations of liability, but they rarely save you from duties to end users or regulators if controls were inadequate. Operator accountability matters. Even if a vendor supplies the model, your deployment choices, thresholds, guardrails, human review shape outcomes, and may define responsibility. Vendor obligations likewise extend beyond license text. Regulators may expect transparency about training data, evaluation limits, and incident reports. The pragmatic posture is layered. Perform risk assessments, log decisions tied to safety, monitor in production, and maintain swift remediation paths. When harm is alleged, you want evidence that choices were reasonable for the context, guided by policy, and responsive to new information. Cross-border data rules shape where your training corpora, telemetry, and model outputs may travel and who can process them. Many jurisdictions restrict export of personal or sensitive data unless specific safeguards are in place, so international transfers hinge on mechanisms such as adequacy determinations, contractual clauses, or binding corporate rules. Conflicts arise when one country demands localization, while another requires centralized oversight or cross-regional incident reporting. The operational answer is architectural. Design for data residency, segregate identifiable elements from analytics, and prefer pseudonymization or privacy-enhancing techniques where feasible. Document transfer assessments, retention limits, and fallback plans if a legal basis changes. Appoint clear owners for cross-border decisions and tie release gates to successful reviews. Treat models themselves as regulated artifacts. Checkpoints, embeddings, and logs may each carry transfer risk. A predictable, evidence-backed process turns geopolitical turbulence into manageable engineering constraints rather than production emergencies. Audit requirements convert promises into verifiable practice. Many regimes impose mandated reporting for security breaches or harmful automated decisions, while others require transparency audits that examine inputs, evaluations, and controls. Algorithmic impact assessments conducted before and after deployment force teams to articulate purpose, risks, mitigations, and oversight. Certification programs and codes of conduct add external validation, but only if your evidence is complete and traceable. Build an audit-ready by default posture. Define canonical control mappings. Keep machine-readable records of data lineage and model versions, and preserve evaluation results with reproducible seeds. Sample regularly to test controls under realistic conditions, and log exceptions with remediation timelines. Clarify roles for internal audit, legal, and product so scoping is efficient rather than adversarial. When audits become routine, they reinforce learning. Gaps surface early, fixes stick, and stakeholders gain confidence that compliance is a system property, not a quarterly scramble. Sector-specific guidance determines the tightest screws in your program. Healthcare contexts elevate privacy, consent, and validation of clinical claims. Decision support tools may face pre-market reviews and post-market monitoring expectations alongside stringent breach notification and audit trails. Financial services oversight stresses model risk management, clear documentation of assumptions, data quality controls, challenger models, and human-in-the-loop thresholds for high-value transactions. Education laws focus on minors, data, parental rights, and limits on profiling, shaping how analytics and tutoring systems collect and retain information. Government use standards emphasize procurement controls, transparency to the public, and rigorous impact assessments for systems affecting rights or benefits. The shared pattern is proportionality. The more consequential the decision domain, the more rigorous the evidence, guardrails, and recourse. Translate these sector nuances into playbooks and gating criteria so product teams know exactly what ready means before going live. Penalties for non-compliance combine formal sanctions with practical pain. Statutory fines can be substantial, particularly for willful or repeated violations, and some regimes add daily penalties until deficiencies are cured. Certifications or licenses may be suspended, cutting off markets or partnerships that require them. Reputational damage compounds costs. Public enforcement actions and adverse headlines erode customer trust, attract scrutiny from investors, and invite more aggressive audits. Litigation exposure follows, from class actions to contractual disputes with vendors and clients who relied on your controls. The durable countermeasure is disciplined proof, contemporaneous records of decisions, controls, and monitoring that show good faith, risk-aware operation. These artifacts won't immunize you from accountability, but they narrow allegations, reduce penalties, and speed resolution. In other words, evidence turns a narrative of negligence into a demonstration of maturity, even when mistakes occur. Governance programs turn legal theory into daily behavior. Start by mapping each legal requirement to a named policy, a control, and an owner. Avoid vague aspirations that no system can implement. Embed compliance checks as gates in the lifecycle, data sourcing reviews in design, rights and licensing attestation before training, red team and evaluation sign-offs before deploy, and post-deployment monitoring with defined triggers for rollback. Document enforcement, not just guidance. Define what happens when a control fails, who is paged, and how exceptions are granted, tracked, and retired. Establish reporting structures that surface meaningful metrics coverage of impact assessments, closure rates for audit findings, incident counts by severity to leadership and, where appropriate, to regulators. When governance is explicit, measurable, and resourced, teams stop treating compliance as a blocker and start using it as scaffolding for faster, safer delivery. Strategically, compliance sustains both your license to operate and your capacity to innovate. Maintaining legal standing keeps channels open, payment rails, app stores, public procurement, while avoiding costly rework driven by enforcement surprises. Clear, documented controls unlock experiments, sandboxes with guardrails, limited pilots with oversight, and measured rollouts that adapt as feedback arrives. Customers read compliance as trust. Regulators read it as seriousness of purpose. Done well, your program becomes a positive differentiator proof that new capabilities arrive with accountability attached. This is not about maximal caution. It is about reliable boundaries that let ambitious teams move quickly without crossing lines. In a competitive, scrutinized market, that combination speed within structure is the sustainable path to advantage. For more cyber-related content and books, please check out cyberauthor.me. Also, there are other prepcasts on cybersecurity and more at baremetalcyber.com. Monitoring legal change is a continuous discipline, not an occasional readout. Build a regulatory watch program that tracks statutes, rulemakings, guidance, and enforcement actions across the jurisdictions where you operate or process data. Use structured sources, official registers, agency bulletins, law firm alerts, and route summaries to a cross-functional committee that includes legal, security, privacy, product, and policy. Maintain a mapped inventory of obligations and owners, with red lines that show what changed and why it matters. Define triggers for action. when a proposed rule becomes final, when a court narrows or expands scope, when a regulator signals new priorities. Pair monitoring with adaptation processes, impact assessments, backlog items, budget asks, and training. Treat this like product management for compliance. The features are updated controls, and the releases are policy and system changes. When governance owns the cadence, teams respond calmly to change instead of firefighting every announcement. Compliance metrics turn obligations into observable performance. Start with audit readiness scores that attest whether artifacts policies, inventories, risk assessments, logs exist, are current, and are easily retrievable. Measure incident reporting rates and timeliness against legal thresholds, distinguishing between security events, privacy breaches, and mandated algorithmic notices. Track remediation timelines for audit findings and control exceptions, ensuring owners and due dates are visible and slippage is escalated. Certification levels attained, in progress, expired, provide an external barometer but pair them with leading indicators such as percentage of models with documented risk assessments, proportion of datasets with verified licensing, and coverage of data subject request workflows. Present metrics by business unit and risk tier so leaders see where attention is needed. Most importantly, time measures to incentives. Make readiness and closure rates part of planning, promotion, and vendor management, so compliance lives in line decisions, not slide decks. Integration into the AI lifecycle makes compliance routine rather than episodic. At design, run legal and privacy checks that frame purpose, lawful basis, data categories, evaluation plans, and human oversight. Before training, confirm data rights and licensing, document provenance, and complete impact assessments where required. Block ingestion when attestations are missing. During development, log experiments, evaluations, and red team results with versioned model cards that support later audits. At deployment, apply legal reviews to user disclosures, labeling of synthetic content, and recourse mechanisms, with go-no-go gates for high-risk use cases. After release, schedule post-deployment audits that sample decisions, test drift controls, and verify incident response playbooks. Close the loop by feeding findings back into specifications and roadmaps. When legal checkpoints are encoded as gates in the same systems engineers already use, compliance becomes a predictable path to launch, not a last-minute scramble. Tooling makes this integration scalable. Regulatory monitoring platforms track proposals, deadlines, and applicability, turning raw text into mapped obligations with owners and effective dates. Governance dashboards tie those obligations to control catalogs, showing coverage, gaps, and evidence status at a glance. Evidence collection systems capture policies, approvals, evaluations, lineage, and user notices in tamper evidence stores, while automated audit logging records who changed what, when, and why across models, data, and prompts. Embed these capabilities into developer workflows, pull requests that update risk records, CI jobs that verify labeling or provenance, and ticketing integrations that enforce sign-offs before promotion. Prefer open schemas so artifacts can be exported for regulators, auditors, or partners without bespoke translation. The aim is one source of truth that is simultaneously useful for day-to-day operations and durable enough to withstand external scrutiny. Global programs face structural challenges that raise costs and complexity. Fragmented laws mean overlapping but non-identical requirements, forcing either maximum baseline controls or a patchwork tailored by region. Jurisdictional conflicts appear when localization rules collide with centralized monitoring, or when disclosure timelines differ, making a single playbook hard to apply. Enforcement strength varies. Some markets move quickly with heavy penalties, while others rely on guidance and negotiated remediation, complicating risk prioritization. Compliance cost is more than legal spend. It includes engineering for residency, duplicated workflows, vendor recontracts, and staff training. Mitigate with modular architecture, separate data, models, telemetry, and admin planes, so you can dial controls up or down per region without redesign. Maintain a clear decision record explaining the chosen posture and alternatives considered. Clarity and modularity reduce churn as the outside world continues to shift. Standardization is the counterweight to fragmentation. Cross-border agreements and adequacy arrangements reduce friction for lawful transfers when organizations demonstrate consistent safeguards. Industry frameworks translate broad principles into testable controls and evidence lists that auditors, customers, and regulators recognize, shrinking debate about what good looks like. Shared certification models create portable assurances that vendors and clients can rely on during procurement, encouraging compatible logging, labeling, and redress mechanisms. International cooperation among standards bodies, regulators, and civil society yields interoperable schemas for manifests, incident reports, and impact assessments, making it realistic to automate compliance across tool chains. Participate actively, adopt open formats, contribute implementation feedback, and map your internal controls to widely used frameworks so you benefit from collective clarity. The payoff is compounding. Each standardized element lowers integration cost and raises trust across markets and partners. Lag is the most predictable limit of current frameworks. Lawmaking moves through consultations, drafts, votes, and court interpretation, while model capabilities advance with every training run and prompt technique. The result is a timing gap. Yesterday's harms are well-defined, today's are debated, and tomorrow's are invisible to statutes. Overly prescriptive rules risk freezing useful practices. Overly vague principles risk uneven enforcement and compliance theater. Treat this gap as a design constraint. Build internal standards that are slightly stricter than the toughest jurisdiction you face, and encode ratchets that let controls tighten without redesign when guidance clarifies. Use policy sandboxing pilots with guardrails, narrow scopes, and logs to learn safely while regulators catch up. Document your reasoning in contemporaneous memos, so when expectations shift, you can show prudent judgment rather than improvisation. Foresight, not perfection, keeps you lawful and adaptable amid moving targets. Ambiguity in definitions is the second hard limit. Terms like high risk, automated decision, biometric categorization, or even AI system vary by jurisdiction, and their boundaries decide which obligations apply. A tool used by a human reviewer may be exempt in one place and regulated heavily in another. Resolve this by adopting a clear internal taxonomy that maps use cases to risk tiers with concrete examples, thresholds, and exclusions. Tie each tier to required artifacts, impact assessments, human-in-the-loop checkpoints, labeling, incident reporting, and post-market monitoring. When a product straddles categories, escalate to a cross-functional review that records assumptions and mitigation, and set a date to revisit as law evolves. Maintain a public-facing explanation of your classifications for transparency with customers and regulators. Clarity you create for yourself reduces surprises later, and it gives auditors a coherent narrative to evaluate rather than a patchwork of ad hoc calls. Enforcement gaps are the third constraint and a temptation. Many regulators are resource-constrained, cross-border cases are complex, and platform responsibilities are still being negotiated. Some regimes rely on complaints or high-profile sweeps, leaving ordinary cases untouched for long stretches. Resist the urge to calibrate to the lowest pressure. Instead, calibrate to evidence. Build audit-ready logs, versioned evaluations, and decision records that would satisfy a serious review, even if one never arrives. Where feasible, submit to voluntary certifications, third-party audits, or program reviews that harden practice and reveal gaps early. Establish relationships with supervisory authorities and industry bodies so you can ask clarifying questions and share lessons learned. Treat disclosures as opportunities to demonstrate maturity, precise timelines, preserved artifacts, and measured remediation plans. Over time, a habit of over-delivering on proof turns regulatory uncertainty into reputational strength. The lack of harmonization multiplies cost and confusion. One market may require data localization while another mandates centralized incident reporting. One may accept synthetic content labels while another expects cryptographic provenance. Disclosure timelines can conflict across borders. Solve this with modularity and mappings. Architect separate control planes for data, models, telemetry, and admin, so you can toggle residency, logging, and labeling per region without code forks. Maintain a single internal control framework mapped to external standards, showing equivalence and deltas, so teams implement once and document many times. Negotiate vendor contracts to honor your baseline across jurisdictions, including export controls on checkpoints and minimum logging. Build playbooks for conflicts. Who decides, what stops, and how you communicate with customers, so trade-offs are swift and defensible. Harmonization may be out of your hands, but interoperability and clarity are not. Stepping back, the legal and compliance horizon gives your AI program its durable boundaries. We examined privacy as the foundational layer, added AI-specific duties tied to risk, and considered content transparency, provenance, and labeling for outputs. We addressed intellectual property, licensing, and derivative work concerns, explored liability, vendor obligations, and operator accountability, and translated cross-border rules into architecture. We turned mandates into practice through audits, impact assessments, sector-specific playbooks, and governance gates across the lifecycle. Metrics, tooling, and standardization made performance visible. Challenges and limits reminded us to favor evidence over slogans. The through line is disciplined adaptability. Codify what you can, measure what you do, and be ready to ratchet controls as expectations evolve. That posture preserves your license to operate while leaving room to build, test, and learn responsibly. Next, we pivot from laws to relationships. Third-party risk in AI. Most modern systems depend on others, model providers, data vendors, labeling firms, evaluators, hosting platforms, and edge devices you do not own. Each partner extends your attack surface and your regulatory exposure, from data use rights to incident notification timelines. The same habits carry forward: inventories, contracts with verifiable obligations, baseline controls you can test, continuous monitoring, and clean exit paths. We will translate the horizon you've just mapped into procurement checklists, service-level expectations, shared evaluation suites, and evidence packages that survive diligence from auditors and customers alike. With those muscles built, you can say yes to external innovation without outsourcing accountability or surprises. That is the practical bridge from policy to ecosystem, and it is where resilient AI programs distinguish themselves. Thanks for tuning in to Bare Metal Cyber, your trusted source for cybersecurity educational materials, news, and insights. Remember to subscribe at baremetalcyber.com so you never miss an update. And visit cyberauthor.me for best-selling cybersecurity books that equip you with expert knowledge. Until next time, stay secure and stay vigilant.